just to wind down, let's have some discussion. That was a really interesting watch. I love seeing how different people approach the game when they're not intimately familiar with it. Like, once you've been around long enough, you've tried a bunch of different decks, you've probably read it, and you've crafted the cards you want. So you can net deck, and you can play the net deck, and you can win, or you can win games with it. It's really cool to see how people kind of account for budgets, how people's knowledge develops. Like, different people learn different things first. So you might get good at like openings, but then your playing around XYZ is worse. And some people learn how to play around AoEs, but their kind of proactive positioning is worse. And it's really cool seeing how different people develop. For the Swarm players, get some card draw in your decks. It will help you a lot. And maybe think more about, like, although you're playing a proactive, aggressive deck, you need to protect your minions. So try not to make it so easy for your opponent to kill them. Like, sometimes they have the AoE and whatever. It doesn't matter where you put your stuff. But most of the time it does. And if you give them the option to kill your stuff for free, it lets them save their AoE for later, when it's more devastating, or when when you're on the ropes and you really need to stick something. Great stream, IMO. Casting was great too for the first time. Thank you so much. Oh yeah, that's a thought. If anyone has casting tips, also let me know, because I'm figuring this out as I go along. And I've not watched nearly enough coverage to have a strong idea of what I wanted to do, apropos of nothing. Hey Baronian, you've literally just caught the end, unfortunately. What else? Yeah, I would recommend... So one thing I saw people doing a lot was kind of using the wrong resources at the wrong time. And I say by wrong, I mean just like somewhat inefficient. It doesn't mean you're a bad person or that you should be fired from the game for making an incorrect decision. It just means that like there's something I would have done differently and that I think is more efficient, more optimal, or frees up the most options for future turns. So one good example is in the first match we watched, the Magma player cast Homeostatic Rebuke to kill a pair of 2/1s when they could have reached one of them and attacked it with their face. It leaves one of them alive, but you also hold on to a Homeostatic Rebuke and you get to develop a minion at the same time. Now that minion itself dies to Rebuke, but you can expect your opponent to remove it. And if not, you can make some trades with it, and then, worst comes to worst, if you have to Rebuke away a Blood-Tide Priestess, so be it. I think there's actually a lot of nuance to replace decisions. I actually did a strategy short about this 2 weeks ago. Replacing the hard way, about planning ahead how you're going to play this turn and maybe the next turn before you make your replace decisions. And I've joked about roping a lot a couple of times during this stream. And part of the reason I rope a lot is because I will often spend like a minute thinking about my replace. And I shouldn't do that. It takes too much of my time, but like there's a lot you can think about, and a surprising amount that you can consider. Along those lines, play more slowly. You've got 90 seconds or whatever the time limit is. Relax. Take your time. Think through alternate lines. Like sometimes it's really obvious, like, yes, I will Lava Slasher their 4/4. But even then, like, where are you going to put your Lava Slasher? What are you going to do next turn? While you've got a bit of breathing room, if you've got an obvious line, you can think about the small details. Like, where should I put myself? Should I attack my general into their general this turn? And why? And try and figure out, like, just get into the habit of thinking ahead and thinking about more stuff. And at some point you'll realize, either through watching someone else or from having an epiphany moment where you're like, oh man, I can think this turn about playing around Macanta in 2 turns instead of next turn. Stuff like that. Think during your opponent's turn as well. Like, people don't always play slowly to give you enough time to think about it, but one of the nice things that Duelyst does is because you draw your hand at the end of your turn, you get to make a decision about what you're going to play and what you're going to replace while your opponent is doing their moves, which helps a ton. And another tip along these lines, this is going to sound silly, but talk to yourself. Streaming really helped me personally, because when I stream, I have to narrate my plays. I have to explain them to an audience. If you just pretend you have an audience, right? Get a unsuspecting family member or a stuffed toy or just the wall, and you explain your play to them. It will help you slow down and think through different lines and process what your opponent's going to do. And I think a lot of the plays that people made felt very rushed. It was like, oh yeah, I'm going to play this now. Let's do it. Kind of almost snap off the cuff decisions. When actually you can get a lot of mileage from thinking like, do I really want to use this card on this target? Do I want to do it now? What am I trying to set up for in a couple of turns? Will I need homeostatic rebuke more than Earthwalker or whatever? What are the upsides and downsides of making each of these decisions? And realistically, you probably won't have time to think about absolutely everything you could think about. Again, I rope constantly. Like I have, half a dozen YouTube videos of me just like missing lethal because I couldn't click on the final unit in time because I only figured out that I had lethal like with 10 seconds left on the clock. But at least I figured it out. And often these lines are very complex. And if you rush to play out a card, or if you just like autopilot, all right, well, I'm casting this here, bam. Now you're down on mana, and later on in the turn you're like, oh, if I hadn't played this earlier on, I could do something else and have lethal or have a better play. So it actually makes a big difference. Actually, rope logic annoys me sometimes. I know what you mean. I've said this before, but I wish Duelyst had like an untimed friendly mode. Not necessarily for tournaments, but just so you could test with somebody and like properly think through every play. Like if you're sitting with someone else, either on Skype or in real life, and looking at your screen, and you could just like sit there and plan out different lines and spend 5 minutes discussing the merits of one play or the other, like you can when you're testing a physical game like Magic. I think that would really help, because there's a lot more to Duelyst than you can really figure out in those 90 seconds, even with very simple decks. There's still a ton of micro-optimization you can do just with your positioning. Where do you put your 2-drops? What do you replace? Like, there's so much to learn. Even with, like, herped up, here's my curve decks, which don't really exist in Duelyst because of replacing and because of positioning. Like, you can't just play out your stuff. And so, the biggest tip I would make to, I think, everybody we watch today is, like, take a breather. You've got loads of time. Try and think about a couple extra things than you thought about last game. It doesn't have to be like, all right, I'm going to sit down and map out every possible sequence that either player could take for the rest of the game, because that's impossible and boring. But, think about your obvious play and then think, is there anything else I can do? What if I play this card first instead? Just literally consider, like, what if I play this one card? Is that good? Yes, no. Maybe I'll do that, or I'll do my first play. And once you're used to that, you add another one. It's like, what if I play this card or this card first? And then start thinking about, like, well, what if my opponent plays a Thunderhorn next turn? Can I deal with that? Is one line better than the other because it deals with what my opponent's doing? One thing, if you're playing aggro decks or combo decks, getting into the habit of counting lethal every single turn, literally, like, to a ridiculous degree, like, turn 1, no one's played a card yet. Do I have lethal? Counts. I have 5 damage. No. Like, it's like, turn 1 for the opponent. All right, I can Rocket Up Terror, shoot them in the face, Phoenix Fire them in the... Oh, not Phoenix Fire, but... Like, whatever, Like, Assassination Protocol, kill that creature. Like, is that lethal? No. Okay, what's next? And it can be a good habit to get into, because a lot of playing decks like 8 gates it's turn 6. I have 8 mana, my opponent's on 15, I have some cards. Do I have lethal? And once you've started doing that, you get into the even more, the big rabbit hole of like, do I have lethal next turn? And then it gets insanely complicated. But it's all small steps. It's all like developing good habits, learning, picking up like thought patterns that will help you generically. Playing Gauntlet is really good for this, because Gauntlet, you can't predict what your opponent's going to play most of the time. Like, you can there are common cards that people often have. Like, oh, what if they play Hailstone Golem next turn? What if they play a Veil Hunter on turn 1? That sort of thing. But you can't really predict their plays outside of, like, oh, they might have a 4-drop on 4 mana. They might have this common removal spell. Like, they might have Blood of Air. That's what, they might have Dispel. But thinking about things in broad terms like that frees you from the pressures of, like, having to memorize their deck list or know the meta. And Gauntlet is so reliant on good positioning that it really tunes up your skill. Like, regardless of how good your deck is, if your positioning is good, your win rate goes whoop. And you can claw your way out of all sorts of games where you're like horribly behind, where if you just position better than the other person does, your cards are like 20% better than theirs, and you'll have units that should die that don't, and they'll have units that shouldn't die that do because they put them in incautiously and you didn't, that kind of thing. And when you come up against really good players, you can tip the scales the other way. Like they would normally have, like this person who's a very experienced player would normally have like their 20% bonus over you because they're positioning in a more nuanced way. So if you can catch up to them, you can beat really scary people by fighting on an even keel. You queue into like a streamer and you're like, oh my god, they're terrifying. But actually, with my practiced positioning, I can fight this person. I can keep up. And it's really satisfying, like the first time you beat someone really scary in a tournament or on ladder. You're like, oh my god, I've queued into Dragol, or oh, my next round is against like Bryguy or whatever, and you win. And it's so satisfying. And all of that is just like, again, baby steps at a time. Like think slightly more each turn. Think during your opponent's turn. Talk to yourself and force yourself to justify why this play is the best play I can make this turn to yourself. And you don't necessarily have to like go somewhere and study for this. A lot of it is just practice of like getting into thought patterns. And it looks obvious in retrospect. Like the thing I mentioned earlier about you want to play around Macanta Warbeast, right? You don't want to get hit in the face. The instinct is to move away from your opponent and put something behind you, but the Warbeast can just reach that. So what I've been doing now is I'll put something next to me, like diagonally, and then move 2 squares away, laterally. And so I'm now outside of the Macanto's AoE, so they can kill my unit or hit me in the face, and that makes such a big difference. And it is so subtle, but like just not taking that 4 damage when they use their Macanto to kill your Forwinds Magi or whatever, just really, really, really helps. And obviously it helps more if the unit is like 4 or greater attack, so the Macanto actually dies. But sometimes you want to deliberately not do that, so you can Superior Mirage them, but outside of those situations, like, it makes such a big difference, just that one little trick. And I figured that out myself. Like, I was playing Control Cast against Bath, like, way back in the day, and I was like, wait a minute, I can do this instead. And yes, they get to attack by killing her for free, but then I'm on the other side of the board because I've put space between me and my opponent. And learning things like that, just from getting into the habit of like thinking about all the options you really have. Like, actually, I can play this unit here or here or here. Most of which will be useless, but like it opens up doors. So that'll be the number one biggest tip I would give to everyone we watch today is like, slow down, relax, don't pressure yourself, especially in high pressure situations like tournaments. Try not to beat yourself up if you're not making the play right now. And just think about like as many options as you can and just gradually increase the number of options you're taking in every single turn.